So in this tutorial we're going to create some motion graphics text using the MoGraph tools in Cinema 4D, and what we're going to do is recreate this fast and furious rotating revealing text where we've got the text sitting on a road here, car drives in front, and each of the letters rotates, and we've also got this text wiping on as the car goes past. So we'll set this 3D text up in Cinema 4D, and then we will composite it with a background and a car graphic using After Effects. So let's go into Cinema 4D and get started. So here I'm in Cinema. First thing I want to do is set up my my project settings, and I'm also going to set up my render settings so that they know that they're all good to go once I start test rendering. So I'm going to hit Command D on my keyboard, and this will bring up my project settings. Now I use 25 frames a second for all my work, so I'll just change my project frame rate to 25 frames a second. The other thing I'm going to do is set up some render settings, so I'm going to hit Command B, and this will bring up the render settings. It's also available from this little wee clapperboard icon with it's a cog icon on it. I'm using Cinema 4D R25. So the interface may look a little different from previous versions. Now, I've actually already got my preferences set up here, so I'm just going to walk through them. I like to use the physical renderer for all my rendering. It's a render engine that's built into Cinema 4D that tries to sort of recreate the properties of natural light in the physical world, and it's a good all-round renderer. What I need to do when I set this up is to jump into the physical tab, make sure that the sampler setting is set to adaptive, my sampler quality I want on automatic, and this means that my shading error threshold, this value here, is basically a quality slider. So the lower this number is, the better the anti-aliasing and the less noise and grain you'll get in your renders, but the lower this is, the longer your renders will take as well. So this value, you'll have to do a little bit of experimenting when it comes to your own projects on what the best value to work at is. I'm going to leave it on 20% to start with. What I would recommend when it comes to doing actual production renders, set that to 10% or even lower. 5% is probably a better sort of level to aim for, but I'm just going to leave it on 20 just to do some testing. The other thing I want to do is go to my save setting. And I'm going to save as PNG files, and I'm also going to make sure that if I click on this little wee dot here, this little wee breadcrumb button, I can just set a folder. I've already got one on my desktop called FH for my rendering, and I'm going to just give my renders a name. This is based on the Fast and the Furious, so I'm just going to call it Fast. So I've got a file and a folder set up there. Also, I'm going to turn on the alpha channel. This is the transparency channel, or the matte, for my image. This means I can composite my 3D work over a background. This is really important. I would always turn this setting on. If you're compositing in After Effects, you can always turn this off later in After Effects. You can choose to ignore the alpha channel, but when you're rendering, you should always have this turned on. So that's my file location and file format set up. I'm also going to go to the Output tab and just make sure that my render settings are 1920 by 1080, which is full HD, and again I want my frame rate to match my project settings. And while I'm testing, I'm just going to render the current frame. When I get to the end and I'm happy with my animation, I'll be rendering the entire sequence. I'll be rendering all the frames, but for now I'll just leave it on current frame. So that's my project settings and my render settings done. So let's just close that. Probably a good idea now to save your scene. Save project as, let's just call this Fast. And that's saved. Okay, so let's get underway. Let's make our text. So as I said before, I'm using Cinema 4D R25. Previously, MoText was in the MoGraph menu. There's been a bit of a change around now. If we just go to the Create menu and go to Mesh Primitives, we can create text. And this is effectively the same as the MoText that was made in previous versions. Now, I'm going to, I've created my text here. Here it is in my Object Manager. And when I select it, here's its attributes down in the Attribute Manager. So I'm going to first of all change the actual text itself, and I'm going to call this Fast, and I'm going to call it Fast and Hilarious, because I think the movies are pretty crazy, they're pretty wacky, and also don't want to get sued. So let's call this fast and hilarious, and I've spelled that wrong. So let's just get in there and fix my typo. Fast and hilarious. If I click off, that'll update. Excellent. I'm just going to center my text to the middle of the screen. I'm also going to change the font. I've got one I've downloaded previously from dafont.com. This one's called BN Elements, and it looks similar to the Fast and Furious text. So if I go to my font setting here, I can click on this and just scroll through all my fonts that I've got. Whoops, I've just accidentally clicked my middle mouse button. So where's BN Elements? There we go. So let's just maximize this. I'm just going to put my cursor over this view and click on the middle mouse button. You can get the same function by clicking these small square boxes at the top corner of your interface, and that will expand or shrink the particular view that you're looking at. Okay, so there's my text. That's looking pretty good. I might just make it a little bit deeper, give it a bit more 3D depth, so I can go to the depth setting, and let's just make that about 40 centimeters. So that's a bit heavier. Okay, so that's looking good. The other thing I like to do is add a little bit of a bevel to the surface of my text. When we build 3D text, these front and back faces of the text, these are called the caps, and we can actually bevel these caps and put a little bit of extra detail in. So with your text selected, if you go to the Caps tab, what I'm going to do is turn up the size of my bevel here. And as I click and drag that up, we can see we're now starting to get some rounding on the corners. Now, we've got a few different styles of beveling. This is a rounded one. There's a curved one where you can create your own custom curve shape. There's a solid one, but I like to use, for this particular project, the step, which gives us these stepped lines or stepped beveled edges. And to me, this kind of looks a little bit like racetrack lanes, and it sort of adds to that feeling of speed, which is what obviously this title is all about. So I'm going to leave that on stepped. So what's really important about using bevels is that when you add those to a surface, as you move your 3D objects through space and through light, you'll get these little highlights run across the edges and the surfaces of your text. And these make the forms of your text easier to read and to see, and to make them more sort of stand out in your scene. So bevels are really handy like that. So I'm going to leave these on here. As I said, just to give a little bit of extra detail. Okay, so that's my text made. So the next thing to do is to create an effector which will control the rotation. So we'll need our MoGraph tools to do that. So make sure you have your MoGraph object selected. So I've got my text selected, and I'm going to go to my MoGraph menu and click Plane Effector. And what we'll see is the text jumps up in the air a little bit. So if we have a look at the plane effector, if we select it and have a look at its parameters, what we can see in here is that position is turned on, and that position Y is 100 centimeters. So what that means is that this text has moved upwards in position 100 centimeters. So that's what this current plane effector is doing. So a plane effector changes the position, rotation, and scale of MoGraph objects. It does a lot of other things as well. But those are the main things that we use plane effectors for. Now, I don't want to change the position of this text. I just want it to rotate in place. So I'm going to turn off position. I'm going to turn on rotation. And I'm going to change this rotation heading so that the text is facing in a different direction. So I'm going to have it facing forwards. If we have a look at my scene here, and I'll set that on -90 degrees. Oops, let's just type that in so it's a little bit easier. And that is facing forwards. So that's my effector. It is turning the text, this MoGraph object, it's rotating those text letters so that they're facing forwards. Now, if you apply a plane effector and nothing happens to your text, I'll just delete this one and do this again. If I create another plane effector and nothing happens, let's go in here and turn off position, turn on rotation, nothing's happening there. So what's going on is that the MoGraph object, the text, and the plane effector, they're not connected together, they're not functioning with each other. when we create effectors, if we have our MoGraph object selected, the effector is automatically connected. If we don't have it selected, the effector doesn't know what it's affecting. So the easy way to fix this is to go to our MoGraph object, which is our text, go into the individual letters, and drag and drop that plain effector in there. So that is now working with that MoGraph text, and you can see here my text is rotated around. So let's go back here, and again let's just set this to 90 degrees, or sorry, minus 90 degrees. So that is our effector rotating our text. So the next step is to create a field, and what a field does is a field animates this effector or controls where this effector is actually having its effect. So this is a standard process when we're making MoGraph animation in Cinema 4D. We'll create some kind of a MoGraph object, then we'll apply effectors to it of some sort, and then we'll use fields to control those effectors. So the fields are found in the actual effectors themselves. So if I go to my plane effector, go to the Fields tab, I can click on this linear field button, and this will create a linear field, which is these two squares sitting in my screen here. And we can also see that the color of my MoGraph text has changed. On the right hand side it's colored, on the left hand side it's not. We'll also notice that on the left hand side the effector is not doing anything, on the right hand side it is. So this field controls where the effector is affecting our MoGraph object. And if I click and drag on this red x-axis from side to side, we can see as that plane effector drives through our MoGraph object, it turns those letters. One thing we can also do, if we click these small dots inside our plane effector, inside our field, we can lengthen the area that the field comes into play. So what we have now with this field quite widely spread apart is that it's a very slow, smooth process of these letters rotating due to the effector. If I drag these so they're close together, we get a very quick rotation of our letters. So these fields, the size and position of them, will control how our effector is actually affecting our text. So the great thing about this now is all we need to do is animate this field driving through our text, and we'll get our animation working for our letters. So let's grab my playhead, which is this little blue rectangle on my timeline, and make sure it's back at frame 0 where we want to start our animation. And I'm going to select my field and drag it all the way across so that all my letters are facing forwards. So my field is in the right place, I'm at the right time on my timeline, I've got my field selected, so now I can just hit the keyframe button and that will set a keyframe for the field. And I can see the keyframe, there's this rectangle that's appeared below my playhead that's telling me I've now got a keyframe there. What I want to do now is animate this. I'm going to do it over 2 seconds of my field driving through this text. We're working at 25 frames a second, so 25 times 2 seconds equals 50 frames. So let's scrub forwards on our timeline to frame 50. Let's drag on this red x-axis the field all the way to the end of my text until all the letters have rotated so they're facing forwards, so about there. And field selected at frame 50, it's in the right position. Let's hit the keyframe button. And now we have another keyframe here. What you'll also see now is Cinema 4D draws a path for my field with the little wee keys, the frames, individual frames, there's little dots on it. And if I hit play now, if I rewind and hit play, there's my text being animated, which is what I want. So that looks good. I'm happy with that. What I would like to do is add a little bit of additional motion to it though. One of the principles of animation is called follow through, and when we're doing any kind of animation it's always good to think about those original principles of animation, and follow through gives us a little bit of momentum, a little bit of motion of our moving objects once they come to a stop. And it was a really easy way of creating this momentum in Cinema 4D using effectors, and that's by using a delay effector. So the effector is going to affect the text, so let's make sure we have the text selected. So we've got it selected. Let's go to the MoGraph menu, and under Effectors, let's grab a Delay Effector. So the Delay Effector, if we go to its Effector tab, what we want to do is change the mode to a spring. And now when we rewind and play, we can see we've got a little bit of a jiggle that happens to our text after the motion of the field moving through it. So the delay effector looks at any motion that has happened already to an object and then adds a spring momentum to it. You can control the strength of that spring by dragging this up, so now we get a really large, slow, soft kind of spring. If we turn that down, we get a much tighter, more subtle little spring. I'm going to leave mine on somewhere around 50 or 60%. So I've got a little bit of extra jiggle on my text. So this is just to help give it a bit more momentum and make it a bit more appealing. So this is looking really good. So that's our animation pretty much done. All we need to do now is to work on the lighting, the camera, and some materials, and then we can render it out and put it into After Effects for compositing.